This video is a Phase 1 case history for the copper-gold porphyry deposit at Mount Milligan. The research has been carried out at the UBC Geophysical Inversion Facility located at the Department of Geophysics and Astronomy in Vancouver, Canada. The principal researchers for the work shown here are Doug Oldenburg, Yagwa Lee, Rob Ellis, and Roman Sheckman. The research has been jointly sponsored by an IOR grant from NSERC and the following companies: BHP Minerals, Placer Dome, Noranda, Kaminko, Falconbridge, Hudson Bay Exploration and Development, Inco, Newmont Gold Company, Kennecott, Western Mining Corporation, and CRA. We also thank Lynx Geosystems, Patterson Grant & Watson, and Wavefront Technologies for software donations that have facilitated our research. The theme for the consortium research is Joint and Cooperative Inversion of Geophysical and Geological Data. The acronym is JACI, J-A-C-I. The global mandate of the consortium is to develop new technologies for mineral exploration. The title of the consortium reflects the need to develop strategies and computer algorithms which integrate many types of information to answer fundamental questions about the existence and spatial disposition of a mineral deposit. Geophysical surveys have the potential to provide quantitative information about the distribution of a physical property such as conductivity, susceptibility, or chargeability. But a fundamental difficulty with the interpretation of any geophysical data set is that there are many distributions of the physical property that give rise to the same response. This non-uniqueness in interpretation can be overcome only by inverting data from many different geophysical surveys and incorporating available geological and geochemical information. Ultimately, we look for a single geologic solution which is compatible with all available information. In this video, we show our progress in achieving this goal for a specific deposit, the copper-gold porphyry deposit at Mount Milligan. JACI research is targeted to generate practical technologies for solving mineral exploration problems. A good way to ensure this is to focus on a particular deposit and develop methods to invert all data that are available from that deposit. The research is therefore driven by questions that arise from the deposit area. As a first site, we've selected Mount Milligan. The first portion of the video, which summarizes our research efforts, is divided into 7 parts. These are respectively: geologic background for Mount Milligan, inversion of magnetic data, inversion of airborne electromagnetic data, inversion of DC resistivity data, inversion of induced polarization data, rock model from drill holes, and joint interpretation and concluding remarks. For those interested in more detailed comparisons, there's a further 10-minute segment of the video which shows individual inversions in more detail and has further comparisons between the recovered distributions of conductivity, susceptibility, chargeability, and the rock and gold models. Mount Milligan is a copper-gold porphyry deposit situated in north-central British Columbia. The property is within the Nechako Plateau near the southern limits of the Swanell Range of the Omanika Mountains. The deposit area lies within early Mesozoic Quesnel terrain, which hosts a number of copper-gold porphyry deposits. Mount Milligan is believed to be a typical deposit, and hence exploration strategies important for Mount Milligan can be expected to be useful in discovering other deposits. The deposit occurs within porphyritic monzonite stocks and adjacent volcanic rocks of the Takla group. Potassic and propylitic alteration have resulted in mineralization consisting of pyrite, chalcopyrite, magnetite, gold, and copper. Extensive knowledge about the geology and mineralization has been achieved through a major drilling program of 919 holes of total length 195,000 meters. The property is dominated by a chain of peaks aligned in a north-south direction. Mount Milligan is the highest peak in the property. It rises to an elevation of 1,508 meters and is rounded and symmetrical in shape. The portion of the Mount Milligan deposit of concern in this study is the main zone, which is south of Mount Milligan on the eastern slopes of the chain at an elevation of 1,100 meters in an area of gentle relief. This shows a geologic sketch of the Mount Milligan deposit. It consists of a suite of mineralized zones, including the MBX, Southern Star, and the 66 zone. Our inversion work concentrates on the MBX zone. That is located by the vertical red feature towards the right-hand side of the picture. The geophysical data that we analyze are taken over an area 1.2 kilometers by 1 kilometer, and our goal is to use these data to detail information about geologic structure and mineralization at depth. Here we see a schematic of the Mount Milligan deposit. Green denotes a volcanic host, which is a latitic rock. Orange denotes a monzonite intrusive, which is the stock for mineralization. Yellow indicates trachytic rock units, which are porous. The deposit model, as shown in this picture, is essentially a vertical structure and displays a symmetry about the vertical axis. This is a reasonable description of the intrusive and the host material at the time of mineralization. For the MBX deposit that we shall analyze, subsequent tectonic activity has caused this picture to rotate about 45 degrees clockwise, and also it is further complicated by faulting and surface erosion. Emplacement of the monzonite intrusive is accompanied by intensive hydrothermal alteration. The most intensive alteration is expected to occur in the region near the boundaries of the stock. Extensive alteration is also expected in and around the porous trachytic units. Both potassic and propylitic alteration can be expected in this pore-free environment. We now turn our attention to alteration products that are expected in this pore-free system. The potassic alteration produces chalcopyrite, magnetite, bornite, and smaller amounts of pyrite. Potassic alteration is expected to occur in a region surrounding the initial stock, and its intensity decreases away from the boundary. Alteration products would be expected both in the host and in the intrusive. The stock itself contains accessory magnetite. Outwards from the potassic alteration zone, we encounter the propylitic alteration, which has produced pyrite and minor amounts of magnetite. It's expected that the pyrite content increases markedly as one proceeds from the potassic to the propylitic alteration zone. The simple conceptual pattern of potassic alteration occurring close to the stock and in the trachytic units, and propylitic alteration occurring in a broad halo around the potassic alteration, is complicated by the reality that there were really a number of alteration events, and their location, intensity, and timescales were different. It is also likely that there was overprinting of propylitic alteration in regions that had already undergone potassic alterations, and vice versa. Many of the alteration products have physical properties that can be detected with geophysical surveys. Magnetite content will alter magnetic susceptibility. Pyrite, chalcopyrite, and bornite affect chargeability of the medium. Significant mineralization and fluid-filled fractures will alter the electrical conductivity. Also, the individual rock units will have intrinsic susceptibilities, chargeabilities, and conductivities that differ from each other. Appropriate geophysical surveys are those which are sensitive to these physical properties. The data at Mount Milligan are airborne electromagnetic data, which are sensitive to the distribution of electrical conductivity, airborne and ground magnetic data, which are sensitive to the distribution of magnetic susceptibility, DC resistivity, which are sensitive to electrical conductivity, induced polarization, or IP data, which are sensitive to chargeability, and geologic information from 900 drill holes. Our goal is to use these data to provide information about the geologic structure, such as the location of faults and boundaries between the intrusive stock and host material and depth of overburden. Most importantly, we want to obtain quantitative information about the distribution of mineralization for the MBX deposit. Our inversions are carried out over a 1.2 kilometer by 1 kilometer area over top of the MBX deposit. We will invert the surface or airborne data from each geophysical survey and generate a three-dimensional distribution of the relevant physical property. Magnetic data are the first set of data to be inverted. When the magnetic field of the Earth impinges upon a rock that contains magnetic material, an induced magnetization is produced. Essentially, the rock acts like a small magnet and produces its own magnetic field, which can be measured at or above the surface of the Earth. The strength of the induced rock magnetization depends upon the magnetic susceptibility. The larger the susceptibility, the greater the strength of the induced magnetization. A mineral with high susceptibility is magnetite, and the induced magnetic fields observed at Mount Milligan are primarily due to the concentrations of that mineral. A large regional aeromagnetic map over the Mount Milligan area shows a very prominent region of high magnetic field indicated by the red color. The size of the mapped area is 18 kilometers by 17 kilometers, so the Mount Milligan deposit is only a very small portion of this map. It is located toward the bottom left-hand side of this picture. The Mount Milligan area is more clearly shown in the smaller scale map, a 6 kilometer by 6 kilometer map. These data show a broad regional high at the top right-hand side and some localized anomalies beneath. It is these anomalies which are associated with the Mount Milligan deposit. The data displayed here are the total magnetic field values. To generate data for the inversion, we must first subtract off the large regional values. The ground magnetic data over the MBX stock, which has had the regional field removed, are shown here. The large magnetic anomaly near the center of the image is associated with the MBX stock. This picture, although informative in its own right, does not provide information about the distribution of susceptibility with depth. To do that, we need to invert the data. All of our geophysical data are inverted with the same methodology. Without going into the details, we outline the essential steps involved in carrying out any inversion. A geophysical survey provides observational data that form constraints upon the Earth model. Here the observation consists of n values of the magnetic field and an estimate of their errors. To represent the Earth mathematically, we first form a cube which contains the volume of the Earth that is sensitive to our survey, and divide the cube into a large number of cells. In order to be able to model geologically complicated structures, we need to have many cells. In our inversions, the number of cells is usually far greater than the number of observations. The physical parameter we are dealing with, in this case susceptibility, is assumed to be constant in each cell. Our goal is to find a susceptibility value for each cell, such that the observations are adequately reproduced. This requires the ability to carry out forward modeling. To do this, we need a computing algorithm which produces simulated magnetic data when a three-dimensional distribution of magnetic susceptibilities has been provided. The final component of the inversion procedure is to have a computer algorithm which adjusts the susceptibilities until the observed data are adequately fit. There are many distributions which will do this, and an appreciation of the non-uniqueness is an essential part of any inverse methodology. In our work, we compute, out of all the possible models which reproduce the data, that model which is smooth in all spatial directions. This type of model is simple in some sense and is easier to interpret geologically than one which has a great deal of structure. To carry out the inversion of the magnetic data, we divided the Earth into 43,000 cells and found a smooth susceptibility model which reproduced the 1,029 observations. To display this three-dimensional model, we perform a volume rendering, select a particular isosurface, and show the final result as a rotating image. The dimensions of the rotating box are 1.2 by 1 kilometer in the horizontal direction and 300 meters in the vertical direction. North and south are marked as capital N and capital S on the image. The rotating image is formed by selecting an isosurface having a magnetic susceptibility of 0.25. The monzonite stalk corresponds to the large body towards the southwest portion of the image. The rainbow dike corresponds to the finger of high susceptibility on the east side. The second set of data acquired over Mount Milligan is from an airborne electromagnetic survey. These data provide information about the distribution of electrical conductivity. The transmitter for the airborne EM survey over Mount Milligan is a horizontal loop located in a bird towed beneath the helicopter. An alternating current in this loop produces a time-varying magnetic field which penetrates the Earth. The depth of penetration depends upon frequency of the transmitter. High frequencies are sensitive only to the near-surface conductivity, while low frequencies penetrate to greater depths. When the time-varying field impinges upon an electrical conductor, it causes eddy currents to flow in the conductor. These currents produce their own magnetic fields, which are recorded by a receiver coil located in the towed bird. At each frequency of the transmitter, the recorded field consists of two parts. There is a part that is in phase with the transmitting or primary field, and there is a part that's out of phase. The towed bird has three sets of coplanar coils operating at 56 kHz, 7200 Hz, and 900 Hz, and thus 6 data values are collected at each location. The airborne survey was flown in north-south lines, which are about 100 meters apart. Data were taken about every 10 meters along the flight line. The inversion of airborne electromagnetic data is computationally very demanding. For the Mount Milligan inversion, we have divided the Earth into 3 layers of cells. The width and length of each cell is 200 meters, and each layer has 42 cells. The large cell size means that it is necessary to invert only a subset of the total data set. A plan view of the cell locations is shown in the image on the left. The dots near the center of each square indicate the precise location of the airborne EM data that will be inverted. Values of the in-phase and out-of-phase components are plotted with error bars on the right. In total, 252 data are inverted to recover conductivities of the 126 cells which make up the Earth model. The recovered conductivity is volume rendered and is plotted as 2 isosurfaces. The blue isosurface corresponds to a resistivity of 10,000 ohm meters. The darker the blue, the more resistive the material is. The more conductive material is given by the red color, which corresponds to an isosurface of 400 ohm meters. Generally, we note a central resistive region that is associated primarily with the monzonite stock and a surrounding halo of more conducting material. The third set of data at Mount Milligan are observations from a DC resistivity survey. In a DC resistivity survey, an electric current is input to the Earth. The path by which this current travels depends upon the distribution of electrical conductivity. In order for the current flow to be time invariant, it is necessary to have electronic charges accumulated at the boundaries of regions of differing conductivity. The diagram here shows that negative charges exist at a boundary where a current flows from a resistive to a conductive region, and positive charges exist where a current flows back to the resistive region. The accumulated charges generate an electrical potential at the surface of the Earth. It is that potential which is measured in a DC resistivity survey. The potential arising from a single current location is measured at a number of positions, as illustrated by the diagram on the right. The measured potential decreases with distance from the current source, but plots of potential as a function of distance provide little insight about the subsurface conductivity. It is preferable to first translate the data to apparent conductivities and then to plot the data in a pseudo-section form. The apparent conductivity is the conductivity of a uniform Earth that provides the same voltage measurement as the field observation. This value is plotted at a point midway between the location of the current and the potential electrodes and at a depth that increases with separation. The illustration here shows how a pseudo-section for a dipole-dipole data set is formed. Present-day interpretations for DC resistivity data are still made by visually examining such contoured pseudo-sections. As an example, the upper diagram shows a conductivity model which consists of a conductive prism in a uniform Earth. The pseudo-section generated from a DC resistivity survey is shown in the bottom panel. Existence and good location of the conductive prism is clearly evident in the pseudo-section. In this instance, where the geology is simple, the pseudo-section can be easily and correctly interpreted. In the next example, the conductivity model has the same buried prism, but there are some small surface conductors. The effect of these surface conductors can easily mask the signal from the buried prism. The pseudo-section at the bottom shows little evidence for the prism. Again, interpretation requires that the data be inverted. Our usual inversion methodology is employed for inverting DC resistivity data, except that the Earth model is now assumed to be two-dimensional. That is, conductivity is assumed to be invariant into and out of the screen. The Earth model is divided into 1,269 cells. Inverting the 420 data that make up the pseudosection produces the conductivity model at the top of the screen. Not only is the buried conductor clearly visible, but the near-surface distorting bodies have been illuminated. For comparison, the pseudosection for this model is shown at the bottom panel. The DC resistivity pole-dipole survey over the MBX region was carried out along east-west lines. The A spacing, or distance between the potential electrodes, was 50 meters, and data for n equal 1 to 4 were collected. A representative pseudosection is shown at the top portion of the screen. The linearity of the observed features and the fact that the vertical scale is only a pseudo-depth makes this image difficult to interpret. Inversion is required. The two-dimensional model recovered by inverting 86 data to obtain conductivity values for 1,600 cells is shown in the bottom panel. The vertical scale is now in meters. The region of low conductivity, shown in blue, corresponds to the monzonite stock. The DC resistivity data were acquired along east-west lines that were spaced 100 meters apart. Data from each line have been inverted and the results composited to form a three-dimensional conductivity model. That model is volume rendered and displayed as isosurfaces in a rotating image. The isosurfaces correspond to 600 and 300 ohm meters. Again, blue indicates resistive material and red indicates conductive material. The major detail in this image is the resistive unit representing the monzonite stock. Surrounding the central resistive unit is a partial halo of more conductive material. There is also a significant eastward dipping conductive feature at the north side of the model. The final geophysical data set to be inverted is induced polarization, or IP data. IP data are simultaneously collected with DC resistivity data. When an electrical potential is applied to the Earth, ionic charges in fluid pathways will attempt to move. If a metallic particle blocks the pathway, as shown in the diagram on the left, then electronic charges will build up. Positive charges will accumulate on one side of the particle, and negative charges will accumulate on the other. The result is an electric dipole which produces an electric potential that can be observed at the surface. The strength of the charged dipole increases with time until an upper limit is reached. This is shown by the diagram on the right. If the current into the ground is shut off, the observed electric potential drops immediately. This is the DC potential. The IP potential then decays to zero as the charges revert back to equilibrium. Effectively, the Earth can be thought to be made up of many microcapacitors, and the physical property that generates the IP response is called the chargeability. As in a DC survey, plots of the potentials are not meaningful. It's preferable to first translate the data to apparent chargeabilities by taking the ratio of the secondary potential to the total potential, and then to plot the data in a pseudosection form. The apparent chargeability is the chargeability of a uniform Earth that provides the same IP voltage as the field observation. This value is plotted at a point midway between the location of the current and potential electrodes and at a depth that increases with separation. The illustration here shows how a pseudosection for a dipole-dipole data set is formed. As with DC resistivity, interpretations for IP data are still made by visually examining contoured pseudosections. A situation where this is viable is shown here. The upper diagram shows a chargeability model which consists of a chargeable prism in a non-chargeable uniform Earth. The pseudosection generated from an IP survey is shown in the bottom panel. Good localization of the chargeable prism is clearly evident in the pseudosection. In this instance, where the geology is simple, the pseudosection can be easily and correctly interpreted. In the next example, the chargeability model has the same buried prism, but there are some chargeable bodies at and near the surface. The effect of these surface bodies masks the signal from the buried prism. The pseudosection at the bottom shows little evidence for the prism. Again, interpretation requires that the data be inverted. The inversion of IP data is a multi-step process. We first invert the DC resistivity data to recover a background conductivity. Sensitivities with respect to the recovered background conductivity are then generated to provide the needed equations. The final step is to solve a linear inverse problem to recover the chargeability from the observed IP data. Inverting the 420 data that made up the pseudosection here produces the chargeability model at the top of the screen. Not only is the buried chargeable body clearly visible, but the near-surface distorting bodies have been illuminated. Again, for comparison, the pseudosection for this model is shown in the bottom panel. A representative IP pseudosection for the MBX deposit is shown at the top of this image. High chargeabilities exist along the left-hand side, and there is indication of another chargeable body towards the right. The linearity of the feature on the left and the fact that the vertical scale is only a pseudodepth makes this image difficult to interpret quantitatively. Inversion is required. The two-dimensional chargeability recovered by inverting 86 data to obtain chargeability values for 1,600 cells is shown at the bottom. The vertical scale is in meters, and we notice a number of high chargeability regions that have been clearly delineated. The IP data for each east-west line over the MBX region have been inverted and composited to form a three-dimensional chargeability model. That model has been volume rendered and is displayed with the use of an isosurface in a rotating image. The cutoff value for the isosurface is 0.05. This corresponds to a chargeability of 5%. The most striking feature in this image is the hole in the interior, which corresponds to the location of the monzonite stock. This hole is surrounded by a halo of chargeable material. The chargeable material extends nearly to the surface on the west. On the north side, there's a significant eastward dipping region of chargeability. The depth of this chargeability lies somewhat below the eastward dipping conductive feature that was observed in that same area. Geologic logs from 600 drill holes in the region of analysis have been examined, and we have selected overburden, fault location, and 5 of the most common rock types, including monzonite, trachytes, and latites, to include in our rock model. The Lynx Geosystems package was used to keep track of the drill hole information, but interactive modeling was required to interpolate the location of individual rock types between the drill holes. The isosurface image displayed here shows the location of 2 rock types in our 7-element model. The monzonite rocks are in red, and trachyte rocks are shown in blue. The rainbow dike is visible on the east, and trachyte dikes are observed to lie between the rainbow dike and the central monzonite unit. The trachyte dikes have a 45-degree plunge, and this corresponds approximately to the rotation that the porphyry deposit has undergone subsequent to the initial emplacement of the stock and mineralization. The blockiness of the model when viewed from the east or west is a reflection of how the geologic model was constructed from the drill hole data. Information from all drill holes within 100-meter wide corridors was composited to form east-west slices of the rock model. We feel that our rock model is a reasonable representation of the true rock model. A comparison of our model with a geologic cross-section developed by Placer Dome is shown here. The major components in these diagrams are the monzonite stock shown in red on both cross-sections, and the volcanics shown as green in the Placer Dome model and as green and blue in our section. The arcuate extension of the monzonite away from the main stock is known as the rainbow dike. The black triangular element within the monzonite stock is also a monzonite rock, but it was not included in our initial 7-element model. The fault zone at the left is the Harris Fault. Overall, the agreement between the two sections is very good. Our goal is to carry out joint interpretation of the available information. This is most readily accomplished by looking at a particular cross-section. Here we're going to concentrate on the 9600 line. We have available a rock model from drill holes, conductivity sections from DC resistivity and airborne EM inversions, chargeability from IP inversion, susceptibility from magnetic inversion, and a gold distribution from Placer Dome. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, our inversion results may be correlated with rock type, or they may reflect alteration products. We first investigate the correlation of our inversion results with rock type and geologic structure. The image at the top of the geologic section produced by Placer Dome has been shown earlier. The geologic cross-section at the 9600 line, produced by Cam DeLong of the Mineral Deposits Research Unit, is shown at the bottom. There are differences between the two geologic representations. For instance, the Harris Fault is denoted by a single dashed line in the bottom diagram, whereas the geometry is slightly more complicated in the top diagram. Nevertheless, the stock and the rainbow dike are clearly identified in the bottom image. The high-angle intrusives in the region of the rainbow dike are the trachytic units. We've taken the geologic section at the bottom and have superimposed it on our inverted results. The first comparison is with conductivity obtained by inverting the DC resistivity data. Attention should be confined primarily to the top 100 meters. The DC resistivity data do not provide meaningful information below that depth because the maximum current and potential dipole separation was only 200 meters. High conductivities are observed at and to the left of the Harris Fault. East of the fault, one observes low conductivities associated with the monzonite stock. Higher conductivities are again observed in the volcanics to the east of where the rainbow dike reaches the surface. The second comparison is again with conductivity, but this time the conductivity is obtained by inverting the airborne EM data. Again, attention should be confined to the top 100 meters, since that corresponds approximately to the depth of investigation for this airborne survey. High conductivities are observed to the left of the Harris Fault, and more resistive material is seen on the right. Conductive material is also observed on the east side of the model as one gets into the volcanics. The interpretation of the conductivity in terms of the geology is somewhat complicated in the region between the stock and the rainbow dike because of the 200-meter cell size used in the inversion. The next comparison is between the geologic structure and the recovered chargeability. High chargeabilities are observed westward of the Harris Fault and in an area enclosed by the rainbow dike. Again, comparisons between the geology and conductivity should be confined to the top 100 meters or so. The location of chargeabilities on the left and right-hand sides of the picture is consistent with the hypothesis that the initial stock and mineralization had a vertical axis of symmetry and that the entire unit has been rotated clockwise 45 degrees and eroded at the surface. An overlay of the geologic section on the recovered magnetic inversion shows a susceptibility high associated with the monzonite stock. This is expected because of the initial magnetite content of the stock. We also notice a susceptibility low in the area enclosed by the rainbow dike. The previous diagrams compared our inversion results with geology. We now make a similar comparison between our inversions and mineralization. Placer Dome has provided a three-dimensional gold model for the MBX deposit. Gold values are provided in categories 1 through 4, with 4 indicating the highest gold concentrations. We will now take the gold values along the 9600 profile and overlay them on our rock model and inversion results. The superposition of gold concentration onto the rock model is shown here. It is most informative to concentrate on the large yellow contour, which identifies category 3 in gold concentration. The contour is centered on the boundary between the stock and the host. This is an area where intensive hydrothermal activity has occurred. The superposition of gold concentration onto the conductivity section obtained by inverting the DC resistivity data is shown in this image. The yellow contour coincides with conductivities of low to intermediate values. Prior to alteration, the stock was resistive compared to its volcanic host. The final conductivity in this region appears to be substantially greater than that of the initial stock, but it is still relatively small. We note that there's a substantial increase in gold concentration beneath the conductive feature at the east. This image shows the gold concentration superimposed onto the conductivity obtained by inverting the airborne EM data. The image is similar to the previous picture and indicates that there is good correspondence between the conductivities produced by the inversion of DC resistivity data and by the airborne EM data. The high gold concentration corresponds to intermediate values of conductivity. Also, high gradients of gold concentration are seen to lie beneath the conductive feature at the east. Superposition of gold concentration onto the chargeability section is shown in this image. There is a first-order correlation between chargeability and gold concentration. It is interesting that the major concentration of gold lies slightly to the left of the major concentration of chargeability. This offset may be typical for copper-gold porphyry deposits. That is, higher gold values tend to be found inboard or toward the stock, where concentrations of chalcopyrite are large, compared to high regions of chargeability away from the stock, which are more related to pyrite content. Superposition of gold onto the magnetic susceptibility indicates the region of high gold values correspond to a low susceptibility, or equivalently to low magnetite concentrations. This was initially unexpected, but the conclusion is supported by visual estimates of magnetite from 4 drill holes in the area. A summary image for the 9600 cross-section can be generated by displaying the last 4 images. Here we display the gold concentration superimposed onto the conductivity, chargeability, susceptibility, and rock model. There's a great deal of information in this picture, but if we concentrate only on the major yellow contour, we see that the high gold concentration is associated with relatively low conductivity and susceptibility, and with high chargeability. The existence of low susceptibility and high gold concentration in the region is supported by drill hole results. This provides a constraint on the geochemical model for Mount Milligan. The Mount Milligan deposit area is complex both from a geologic perspective and because of its history of alteration episodes. Physical properties are affected both by rock type and by alteration state, and thus making inferences about either rock type or mineralization directly from the geophysical data is not easily done. In this video, we have shown how geophysical data can be used to provide information to help solve mineral exploration problems. A most important conclusion in our work is that geophysicists no longer need be satisfied with making geophysical and geologic inferences directly from plots of field data. Formal inversion of geophysical data is demanded if quantitative information about the subsurface is desired. At the Geophysical Inversion Facility, we've developed techniques to carry out these inversions. Those techniques have been applied to 4 data sets from Mount Milligan to recover 3-dimensional distributions of the physical property that is relevant to the particular survey. The distribution of electrical conductivity has been useful in delineating between the monzonite stock and the host material, and also in delineating fault regions. The combination of conductivity and susceptibility provide good estimates for location of the intrusive stock. Chargeability is primarily governed by alteration, and even drilling the chargeability high along the 9600 line would have found the major gold region in the Rainbow Dike area. Moreover, if the geochemical model is such that the gold concentration should be anti-correlated with magnetic susceptibility, and that highest gold concentration should lie inboard from the chargeability high, then the joint interpretation of the geophysical data would have given rise to a drill hole which would have penetrated the center of the high gold contour. As a concluding comment, the case history presented here is based more upon a joint interpretation than a joint or cooperative inversion. There is still further work to be done in this regard, but crucial data are missing. No geophysical borehole logging data was carried out at Mount Milligan. Yet these data are necessary for establishing values of physical properties at particular locations and for establishing tentative relationships between the value of a physical property and the rock type and alteration state. It is our hope that mining companies will be able to expend more resources to collect this valuable information. Such data, along with high-quality surface and borehole geophysical surveys, will allow sophisticated inversion to be carried out to yield information about the subsurface, which is unprecedented in its clarity and in its importance to mineral exploration and ore delineation.